And if this is your first time here, welcome. We are Lean Portland, a group of Lean and Six Sigma or continuous improvement practitioners who want to extend our expertise into the community. So we're all about sharing our methods, resources, results, so that we can all learn from each other. A couple ways that you can follow us, reach out to us, listed on the bottom of the slide. We've got a website, we have an email address. You are probably here by way of Eventbrite. So you can follow us on Eventbrite and get a notification each time we add a new event to the schedule. I also put our Slack channel on here, and it's not widely used, but for those of you that do like to use Slack, it's there also for another space for us to communicate with each other. So there's three main things that we do at Lean Portland. We have this First Tuesday happy hour where we've been online over the last year or more. I think a year now we're going on. We have different activities that we've done, different speakers. Of course, we have Paddy O'Brien with us tonight. We also do other free and donation-based workshops. Those tend to be more of like Lean 101 or maybe a workshop on a particular topic. Those are added to Eventbrite as we have different facilitators come in and volunteer to do one of those workshops. And we also have a pro bono consulting program that we've been working on since 2012 in various different capacities. And we're working on a new program this year to do a micro improvement workshop, which actually goes along with the theme that Paddy's going to talk about tonight. We have a couple of nonprofits here in Portland that we're are spinning up projects with over the next 3 to 6 months. So that's pretty exciting on our end. So tonight we have Paddy O'Brien with us, and Paddy is a good friend of mine and longtime friend of Lean Portland. She has written a book previously called Lean for the Nonprofit, and has a new book coming out that is all about facilitation. So Paddy has 17 years of experience instituting Lean in state government and training nonprofit organizations around Oregon in how to save money by removing waste in their processes. Her new book is a soup to nuts guide that takes you on a new path of facilitation, complete with Cliff's Notes. And I'm going to hand it over to Paddy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad you gave me some time to come hear what I've been thinking about and putting new ideas into a couple books. And I'm going to briefly talk about them, why I wrote them, and what I think can be done with them. The first book was published in 2017. It was Lean for the Nonprofit. The reason I did that book is that my job at the state of Oregon was to travel around the state and provide technical assistance to the many nonprofit providers of state services. And what I learned and observed in probably 30 different counties really convinced me that Lean could be beneficial to these organizations. And added to that, in a time of scarce resources, particularly back to the recession of 2008, nonprofits were scrambling around trying to balance a budget in a time of when foundations were pulling in their belts, churches weren't coming up with funds. They only had the option of cutting programs to balance their budget. And I really think they needed to be presented another alternative. And I think that's what Lean does. The second book is going to come out in early June. This book has 12 chapters, and I obviously been writing it for a long time, but it's a compilation of learnings and changes and creation of new tools that I've picked up over, facilitating over 30 workshops. So everything in the book is based on RPI workshops that have been done throughout state government. So I think you'll see some examples in there that you can relate to. But first, I want to go straight into Lean for the Nonprofit. And I want to talk to you about one of the stories in the book. You may ask, how do nonprofits even think about using lean? Well, here's an example. A nonprofit zoo was forced to cut their budgets and they took out line items for future projects. And one of the future projects was the staff wanted to build a koala bear exhibit. They found out that their project was dismissed. But they knew that there was local people in hospitals who were learning about lean, and they went down and participated in the training and asked if this was possible to use at the zoo. And indeed it was. So they went about doing about 3 recommendations that actually went into discovered waste in the processes. And the money spent on that waste was recouped and reinvested. One of the things before we go into the major improvements, I want you to note a couple things is the voice of the customer comes through and the importance of data. So the first thing that the team did was they listed their operational processes. And here they are: ticket sales, cleaning of exhibits, paying the employees, maintaining the grounds, monitoring the health of the animals. So, I didn't explain that. So when I'm using teams, I didn't explain exactly what these teams are. So let me just digress a minute. An RPI has a trained facilitator who facilitates a work team made up of staff who understand what the process is that they are having to review. And they're given a forum to make contributions to solutions. And all of this is done in a very compressed period of time, within 3 to 5 days. So just an aside, sorry about that. So back to the processes. And so the work team here found out that there were complaints, voice of the customer, on paying the employees. There were a lot of complaints from employees that their check stubs had a lot of mistakes. This not only happened one time, but several times. So they went about their work of gathering their data. They flowcharted, they interviewed employees, they did time studies, they calculated how many mistakes were made, who made them, was it a training issue or was it a system issue? So they went ahead and they made improvements on the check stubs and the paying of the employees. The next thing they did, they didn't stop there, was they found out that there was further improvements needed in ticket sales. And they ended up reviewing and observing the lines that were being queued up to get tickets to come into the zoo. Now, why were they doing that? Because the director had information that said, particularly on holidays and weekends, the attendance at the zoo was decreasing. This was very alarming to him, and he wanted to find out why. So what the team did was observe long lines and also observed people leaving the long lines before they even got to the ticket booth. So there's a reason for why that happened. What they did was they set up different ticket windows for different types of customers. And they also went through and automated the ticket system because there was a lot of wait time in it. For their last improvement, I know this is fuzzy, but this is a map of a zoo grounds. And here's another instance where the voice of the customer comes in. The director of the zoo sent out customer surveys to the whole list of patrons who'd come to the zoo. What he got back, and especially from moms of young children, was that they would bring the children to the zoo and the exhibits were so far apart from each other that the children got so tired that they had to leave the zoo early. And they vowed never to come back again with the kids. So there was some lost revenue going on there. So what could the team do about this, making an improvement? Well, they gathered their facts. They got a a blueprint. They found out more about the exhibits. They honed in on what were the popular kid-centric exhibits, and they did some experiments. And they finally ended up moving all the exhibits close together and moved them near the front gate. So that's just a short little example from nonprofits. There are many others, and I'm sure you can cite them. But this one was a different kind, because we're dealing with the public, we're dealing with programs, but you could see in essence the same lean principles: process, voice of the customer, and collecting data. So you may wonder what happened. The team recouped enough money that was spent on waste, and they were able to reinvest it. And of course, they built their own koala bear exhibit. And, a windfall was many people were attracted to the zoo because of the exhibit. And of course, revenues went up for the zoo.
What zoo was this?
I made it up. I mean, I didn't make it up. It was a case study, and I'm giving you details from it.
Okay, I was just curious what zoo it was that you worked on.
I didn't work on this. This is an example I got from someone else.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, sorry. The last thing I wanted to bring up was the table of contents. Lean for the nonprofit is a very, very slim primer, and it's written in a way for the executive director who knows nothing about lean, and for a board of directors who may want to get more educated about lean. And they want to know what it entails. So very simply, table of contents: what's lean? Show me how it works. What must I do before I invite lean into my organization was based on the workshops I've done. So I laid out in detail what really happens. It does affect the rest of the staff. People have to be sequestered for 3 to 5 days. Somebody has to cover their duties. But the good thing is that it costs little or no money to do this.
I have a question. Didn't it cost quite a bit of money for them to move the exhibits, and was that factored in?
Yes.
How was that factored in, I guess?
Well, the details of that would be they did some experiments to see, they moved 1 or 2, and they would do some experiments to see how much that would cost. And they did some pilots and maybe moved a few of them. And then they realized that there was great benefit to the cost being spent, that they were getting more attendance.
I have a question. Your table of contents that you have for the lean, how is that different than the for-profit organization in lean? I mean, the first thing I'm always asked is, how much is it going to cost?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? And so am I just missing something?
Well, I will show you something when we get there, a graph that's in the book that will help explain that. Okay. It has to do with focusing in on waste in a process. And usually a lot of for-profit organizations and I would say traditional focus on throwing more money and resources at the stuff that's working well. How is this different from what's applied in a profit-making organization? That's one of them. But remember, these people who are in nonprofit or government don't have profit-making mentality. So we have to approach and appeal to them in a different way. Like, what is your mission? What's the intention? Are you measuring what you're doing? Are you satisfying your customer and who that customer is? So, Peter Drucker said, there are very few MBAs in nonprofits. And I'm really speaking to the nonprofit organizations and government who can find usefulness in Lean, because I think it's very user-friendly.
Patty, I have a question. This is May.
Hi, May.
Hey, good to see you.
Mhm.
And this is great. So, a couple of questions. So, one is, how did they, or this case, was there any prioritization done? How did they prioritize each of the RPIs, or were they kind of done concurrently? And were the expectations or objectives kind of all similar for each of them?
That was actually just one RPI with 3 different problems that they found and tackled.
Oh.
The manual will speak more to that, about how you prioritize RPI projects. And let me talk about that when I get to the manual, because
Okay.
there is a way to do that, and it's really important. Basically do an impact, matrix, and figure out what you can get done easily and quick to show a quick win. So anyway, I can talk more about that. Thank you. That's a great question.
Okay.
This book is written from facilitator to facilitator. And the reason I wrote it is what I wrote in the preface. As one facilitator to another, we've often been taught our first professional lessons by experts, from both in-house trainers and outside consultants. When the training ends and the consultants leave, we are left to practice our new craft on our own. And I found that soon the initial learnings wore thin, and there appears new gaps in our knowledge, and there was no one to go to. Here's a manual with a step-by-step guide to facilitating a workshop. It shows you what I call the helicopter view and the Jeep view. When you're a facilitator, you got to look all the way down the road to the end. And so that's what I call the helicopter view. And if you look at this, you will see that there are 10 components. So I took the liberty and changed up the traditional way or the path of a Kaizen workshop. I can answer your questions why I did that. It was things that I learned. But anyway, it starts out laying the foundation, and it goes all the way to report out continuous improvement. And each one of these dots is a chapter in the manual. And the manual replicates the agenda of course, the path of the workshop. 2 things I did was I divided the workshop into 2, right after between the 4th and 5th step. I worried about people getting confused about the long list of wastes that we learn about. And for me, it was, wait a minute, I learned these wastes, but it's out of context. I don't know what to do about it. So I renamed it, and I set up an exercise for the team where they learned how to go step by step and determine whether or not a step was waste or not. It was necessary because of legislation. So that was an important. And from step 5 all the way through to step 8, I focused on the flow of the process. How does the flow move through the process? And I started up by saying, improve the workflow as it comes in. Improve the workflow going through, and improve work methods, and improve process supports, which are often left out. So that's the big helicopter view, and I can talk more about that. The next view is what I call the Jeep view, and this is the detail. What is to happen at each step in the workshop. It lays out how to facilitate from day 1, and I have added a lengthy appendix on how to prep for an RPI. Sometimes starting out 6 weeks just to even get a date for the workshops. So let me get into little detailed examples about what's in the manual. I know you can't read all of this, but if you look, this is a page out of the manual, and it is made up of instructions, a prompt that says say in your own words, and italics that are really lessons learned. So if you imagine yourself that one of the things you have to do is review what is a process for the team, it instructs you to put up a simple flow diagram on a flip chart. And then it prompts you to read through what say in your own words is. And the reason I put this in as a self-study, because when you read something like that, you have to reflect on it and make it your own. So just a couple suggestions of that. And one of the things that's important is this: most people do their work so automatically that they do not realize it has a structure to it. Their work consists of one-time tasks, but mostly the work is made up of routine processes. So that's one of the things that you would say to the team. When you get down to the parentheses in italics, here's a note. Many times the team may not be clear about exactly what defines a process. Help them out by saying it's repetitive, not just a one-time task. It's made up of sequential step-to-step activities. So this is really important, and the emphasis throughout the whole manual is I'm trying to get the team to think in terms of process. I got to change their paradigm. So I keep coming back to that all the time. Let's see, let's go on to, I put new tools that I found necessary to put into the manual to make the facilitation easier. This is a tool called a data matrix. In these workshops, we collect data all the time. If we don't have enough data, we can't really prove that our hypothesis about an improvement will really indeed be an improvement. So this is a handy matrix that shows what, where, and when of the data collection. So for instance, in the RPI agenda, the introduction part, the RPI team tests are determine customer need. The data question is what attributes need to be present in the output, and what's the tool that you would use. You could use a customer to quality tool, a SIPOC chart, and it goes on through each chapter. So, facilitator can use it, adapt it, but it's there. Unusually, you don't see this, but I wanted to put in a partial index page of the manual. And the reason I did this is because I want the manual also to serve as a research for topics. I found that when I did research, I couldn't really put it in the context of the work I was doing, So since this book is made up of a lot of experiences and projects that have been completed, it gives you a little bit of glimpse of how it fits in there. So federal funding at the top has 3 citations, and all the way to the bottom, there's 3 citations for health systems, including business systems, missed appointments in health clinics, and a health systems map. This is a manual to help you transition from rote learning to feeling confident and to feel more comfortable thinking on your feet. You know more than you think you do, and it's just a matter of making it your own. So I leave you with 2 things. One is, and this is to answer a question earlier, number 1, don't do what others do. This graph represents the percentage of waste in a process from a particular project. And true to the statistics we see a lot, 80 or 90% of the steps in a process are waste. And as I said earlier, traditional organizations may not know about waste, and they may look at throwing more resources at only the 20% that's working. Well, they're going to hire more people, they're going to hire more consultants, they're going to do more training. With the waste in a process, as we saw in a couple examples, there really is very little cost to that, because you're using your own team, and you may have to pay for a trained facilitator. And so in answer to the question about, the expense of moving the exhibits, that expense had to be approved, I'm sure, but usually the easier, quick improvements are done first, and the other ones are experiments, hypothesis. And so instead of saving money, the traditional organization, of course, would be spending a lot of money to increase customer satisfaction. If they knew about waste, they knew that waste makes whatever is coming out of the process for the customer probably incomplete, not on time, and that customer isn't satisfied. So if you remove the waste, you're also increasing customer service. And guess how much one or the other costs? Certainly. The other thing I was going to mention was, if I asked you, what is the main process you work on, could you tell me? And once again, it's understanding what is a process in the first place. And, many of us in organizations don't really look at this. And I find this, it sabotages the improvement work later on if we don't know this. This is a list of processes for city government. It comes from the American Productivity and Quality Center. So my takeaway for you is know what your processes are and what they do and who is the process owner. So that's about it. I wanted to go through that quickly. So thank you for taking the time to listen. And I think I did that within the time allotted, didn't I?
You did great, Patty.
Oh, well, a little nervous.
So I think Brittany has some questions that we had prepped beforehand. And then after that, we'll open it up to the group again for more questions, and then do our usual breakout sessions in the end for continued discussion or general networking. So Brittany, over to you.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Brittany, and I'm with Lean Portland. I had a chance to work with Patty on some of the manuscript preparation and got a chance to learn a little bit more about the manual, which is great. And so, Patty, I was wondering, your book is a soup to nuts guide and includes steps and instructions and examples. And along that continuum that you showed, there are a couple pauses in the process for reflection and quality checks. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about these pauses and why they're important.
That's a great question, Brittany. Thank you, because this is strictly what I've learned from my own mistakes and what I've seen happen with teams. First of all, it's a pause is a good quality check for the RPI process in the first place. And I do it after we do the first set of improvements, step-by-step analysis, and taking what is unnecessary or wasteful steps out of the process first. It's like pruning a tree. And after that, I discovered the team is starting to look a little anxious because they know enough now. They know what the current process is. They've collected enough data. And what they have in front of them is the governing document, which is really the charter, which says, we really want to meet this goal. You have to stay within these parameters. And the team is beginning to doubt whether or not they can do that. And so I take a pause there and I say, let's talk about it. Let's bring in the sponsor and we can change it if you need to. The other reason I put that pause in was sometimes we don't have enough time to do 5 days. And this is a great time to say, how much do we know now? And the benefit of putting improvements in right now is sufficient enough. And then we can move on. You usually don't get that sort of perspective from trainers or consultants. You don't have to go. So there are matrices, and I don't know how many times somebody says, we already know the answer to that. So I had to develop a matrix to say, okay, what do you want to do with that? I want to prove with enough data that you really do know what the answer is. So it really streamlines the process, but there's a matrix in the manual that covers that. And the second pause I put in there, I think I put in after we did all the smoothing out improvements. And that pause was, how do I land this 747? We've done all this work. And so I made up methods of how to sort through all the work that the team did. And, this is where we put it on an impact difficulty matrix to figure out what we tackle first, second, third, fourth. So that was the pause there. Again, it's another quality check. Did that answer it?
Yep, I think so. Thank you.
Mm.
And then another question. You encourage facilitators to be comfortable in their own ability to think in terms of process. Can you tell us more about the importance of this way of thinking and its application in facilitation, and how facilitators can continue to hone that skill?
Well, I alluded to that. One of the first things I do in the manual is I explain an icebreaker that you do with the team, which is to teach them about process. Mm-hmm. And I ask somebody to come up and play a worker and tell the team what he or she does. And so, and then ask them who their customer is. And inevitably they say, we don't have a customer. But they do. So we go through an exercise in that to start laying out, thinking about in your own work, how your work is a process. Most organizations think that people perceive them through an org chart, but actually our organizations are made up of interrelated work processes. I mean, they cross silos. So inevitably throughout the facilitation, somebody will come up with an idea, and I said, how does that affect the process? How does that improve the process, etc.? I just think we need to become more comfortable in thinking that way. And there are tools to do that, but otherwise I think we get into problem solving for the sake of problem solving without thinking about lean problem solving.
And then I'm curious about your thoughts on the balance between a facilitator having a structure versus going with the flow when they're facilitating a workshop.
You need both. My idea is if you have a structure, you can go with the flow better because you can always come back to an anchor. So, it's plan, do, check, act. So you have to go with the flow. And I talk about it in the manual when I said, oh my goodness, I had to change direction because such and such came up. Or I had to make them go out and gather more data because they didn't have enough. And how do I know that? So, yeah, I think when you've had some experience in this and then you get into a manual, you are really feeling comfortable, and I think the freedom to be flexible where you need to be, as long as you come back to the core. Anyway, that's my answer.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to Maria for the other portions of our time here this evening.
Okay, thank you, Brittany.
Mhm.
So at this point, I want to open it up to the group for a question. And Patty, I'm going off of this idea. I think it was in Brittany's first question about the reflection steps. And you said, part of that was to kind of check in on any doubt in the group. So I know commonly, well, I don't know that commonly is the right word, but I'm sure that we all at some time have heard lean won't work here, this won't work here, we're so different, this isn't going to work for us. And I'm wondering to the group, what are some different ways that you've used to address that? And you can unmute yourself and go ahead and answer, or type in the chat if that works better for you.
For me, it's always been getting some quick wins of seeing, like, what can I do right now to help show you or demonstrate the places that this works. The other thing that I like to do is at the beginning of an engagement with someone, just kind of drop like the downtime wastes here and there and ask them their thoughts. And they usually don't have any at the beginning of the day, but later in the day or later in the week, they'll come up with a lot of ideas, and then they're kind of like convincing themselves. And I'm like, yeah, that is a great idea. We should do something. And then at that point, they've kind of got some of those quick wins going.
Good. So quick wins, and then relying on that, like a kind of brainstorm around the different types of waste. Go ahead, Jason.
All right. One of the things that I have found helpful is really just reviewing what the current process is, mapping that out, getting everyone in a room to say, hey, tell me, what is it that we are doing? And let's put it down on paper. And through that process, it's amazing how much people are like, oh, we didn't know we were doing it this, so and you're doing it that way. And then why are we having 3 different handoffs? And so just seeing like, okay, what are we currently doing? And then having that game plan of strategy of like, I know where I want to go with this, but helping the group kind of get there by seeing, obviously what we're currently doing isn't working.
Good. Yeah, helping us all see the process is great. Adam, I think you were going to jump in there too.
Sure. So I like to work earlier in the process with leadership around what I would call the chartering process. So the whole idea to say, what's the problem we're really trying to solve, and understanding it from the customer point of view, and then going to Gemba to go see it first. So let's actually review it as it happens, and then now let's step back and say, well, if we solve this, is this beneficial? Right. So most people would say, let's say, for example, no one wants to go home hurt. Right. So if we have safety risk, I think you can get people aligned around the principle of no one wants to go home hurt. No one wants to disappoint the customer. No one wants to make their work harder. They want to make it simpler. So if you can start to provide the image of what is possible, right? But you have to get a leadership aligned first. You can't just throw people in a room, slapdash, right? So the whole point is get them aligned, set them up for the win, and then people will start engaging and opening up.
I'm remembering Kevin's question earlier about the difference between a nonprofit and profit. Are there different ways that we would approach this in terms of doubting our ability to improve in one situation or the other?
I actually see no difference. I've worked with both over the years. Process is process and people are people, to be honest with you. Again, it goes back to the idea of the image of what good could look like based on what the customer requires. So when you think of the nonprofit, they're delivering a service to a customer from the zoo standpoint, from United Way standpoint, whatever that is. As long as you can give them a way to imagine what that could be, I don't think it really matters whether you're profit or nonprofit.
What if you're inside an organization working with a team and not at the leadership level? For those of us that are working inside an organization. Okay, some of you I know are working at companies. How do you address doubts about lean there?
I can add just what I remember when I used to work at a company. It was just trying to take advantage of past successes, if there were any. So yes, this happened in HR, and we're here talking in joint ventures, or we're talking about service and support, and this happened in manufacturing. But I think just trying to show them some examples of people and processes that they are somewhat familiar with, or maybe even people they know, and maybe they'll reach out, or they'll at least see that it does work in their organization, and now they can at least open up a little bit more to how might this affect or work in my specific process. If you're starting off at the very beginning, then it gets a little challenging. You have to kind of look for similar companies that have done or published some examples that sound similar to what they've done, and hope that that's enough to get them interested in going further.
Yeah, I would second that, and also say I think it's about asking the right questions. You know, identifying what is helping them, asking enough open-ended questions to give them a chance to speak to what they think the challenges are, and then finding some analogies with what others have done based on that. So letting them bring it up and you helping find the connections.
I was just going to add that I think it's almost easier when you're inside of an operation. You can see where a lot of the waste is happening. You know what those pain points are, and so you can speak to them in a fairly compelling manner. Like, hey, there's this process. Like, if we think about that, like, wouldn't we all like that process to be better? And I feel like that, you know, it's almost easier that way.
Good. Jude, go ahead.
So I'm new, to Lean Portland, and I've only practiced in I would say in some very limited settings within my own business, and it was a light manufacturing business. So take this for what it's worth. But I definitely wanted to connect in with the emotional aspect of it, the why we're doing it. And what I found is that when I could slow down, so in the initial laying out of maybe like an improvement process event, if I could slow that down and connect with the outcomes that we would gain as a small business, so work-life balance was a really big one, I could bring people into the juicy vision of what we could create together. And also create security around it as well, because change is a really difficult word for people, or can be a difficult word for people if there isn't enough rapport built. And I've done it well, and I've done it really poorly, and I've had the opportunity to learn from that. And so on this particular team, really slowing things down, clarifying the why, and getting that in alignment was incredibly helpful.
Good, thank you.
I think having the inside knowledge about past problems and challenges, I definitely have leveraged that before. Like when there's a bad customer problem that went through, I could say, remember that issue that happened? Because we're all kind of in the loop on those things. So I wouldn't have that experience as a consultant externally, but being an employee, you hear about all those stories, or you hear secondhand rumblings of something that went wrong. Like, how did that ballpoint pen get put into the equipment or the product? You know, you use those as examples to say, like, yeah, those types of things, those are the things we want to go address and solve.
Yeah, good. I've got one more question for the whole group, but before we go there, are there any questions that are coming up from you all? Tree, go ahead.
This was actually a question for the presenter rather than the whole group. I don't know, is this an appropriate
Yeah, go
time for
ahead.
that? I was curious about the statement that you had changed the sequence of things, and I was curious what the change in the sequence was of the different, steps in the process. And I was curious whether that change in sequence was specific to doing stuff in a nonprofit setting, or whether you also would expect to make those same changes in the sequence in a for-profit setting.
Yes. It would be the same in a for-profit setting.
Okay. So I'm curious, like, what experience you had, like, how did you change the sequence, and what experience maybe that you had that led you to change the sequence?
So you're talking about the sequence of a process, the steps in the process.
Yeah.
Well, after the step analysis in the first part of improvements, you're dropping out an awful lot of steps. You're down to bare bones. And then you ask, if we want to proceed to become more efficient and effective, can we rearrange some of these? Can we outsource some of this? If, for example, I had a case where I was looking at the foster care program. Well, you know, foster care parents have to apply to be a foster care parent. And, and they also have to go through 6 weeks of training. Well, unfortunately, they go through the training and their application doesn't get accepted. I mean, we know all sort of, that's just waste. And there are tools for that. It's sort of like, what do we do first? What do we do second? What needs to be done? But my recommendation is to get down to bare bones in your process by removing what's unnecessary and then do what you have to do from there.
I think my question was more about, you had made a statement in the presentation that was about sort of sequencing of the steps, I think, but I mean, it's possible I misunderstood what you said, but I think you said, oh, I'm doing these in a different order than I originally would have, or than some other
Sorry.
documentation of the process might recommend.
The whole path from the helicopter view.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. I changed up the sequence of steps.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. And I did that because of, if you recall, I said, let's divide this to be more manageable for the team. Let's focus on removing the steps that aren't necessary, removing the waste. And then, like, if you imagine a roundabout, we want to make that flow move consistently. So I'm going to focus on the flow. So, and then I divided that flow up to the beginning. What comes in? How many times have you seen where a process and there is a gatekeeper or somebody says, look it, I do whatever lands on my desk first. And, you know, no wonder we have backlog. So that's what I meant, the general helicopter. Sorry, I did that at first.